So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to solve three equations in three unknowns, and I'll be using the RowOperation command in Maple. So let's begin by defining our matrix. To do that, I need to toggle math mode. I do that by pressing Control K. That gives me this math prompt here. And there are several ways to define a matrix in Maple. I'll do it this way. You can look up other ways to do it. I'll call my matrix capital A, which is kind of a conventional to give matrices capital letters. And I'll use this way of defining my matrix. 0 bar minus 1 bar 1 bar 2. That's the first row of my matrix. And then 2 bar 4 bar minus 2 bar 2. That's the second row. And then 3 bar 4 9. That's the third row of my matrix. And I end the command line with a semicolon and then enter. So Maple now tells me that it has defined the matrix A here, and I'm ready to manipulate the rows in this matrix now. Now this may be a good time to remind you that what I want to achieve is a matrix which has all zeros in this part except for the diagonal over here, where I want ones, and then 3 numbers over here, possibly zeros as well. So that's kind of the reduced form I want to end up with. So it seems like I have a problem to start with because I have a 0 here. So what I want to do to begin with is to swap 2 of these rows, say the first and the second row, in order to achieve something that's non-zero here at the first row and first column element. Now let's take a look at how the RowOperation command works. For our purpose, we need 3 different types of operations. The first one is that we need to swap 2 rows, like I just said. We would like to swap, say, row 1 and row 2. How do we do that with this RowOperation command? Well, let's look at the syntax for this command. The syntax looks like this. The first, it takes, as you can see, it takes 4 input variables. The first variable is just the matrix name, which would be A in our case. And then there's a list. The list is indicated by these 2 square brackets here. A list containing 2 numbers, namely the number of row 1 and the number of row 2, whichever row that might be. In our case, that would be row 1 and 2, because these are the ones we want to swap. And then as the fourth argument here is just a number k that you might want to multiply one of the rows by. So in our case, we want to swap 2 rows, and that is done this way. So first I need a math prompt. And I'll type in the command RowOperation, and it's the matrix A that I'm concerned about. And the rows I want to swap is row 1 and 2, and I'll just leave the number k out of it because I don't want to multiply any of the rows by any number. So that's it. As you can see, I swapped row 1 and 2 here in this new matrix. Now it might be profitable to name this new matrix somehow, so I'll just call it T1 for whatever reason, and I'll run the command once again. Now the next thing I would like to do is to provide a 1 up here in the left upper corner, and that is of course done by dividing this entire row here by 2, or alternatively multiplying it by a half. So how is that done? So that's the next case we want to look into. So we write row operation, and the matrix we want to manipulate is now T1. And instead of inputting a list of numbers, I'll just write 1, because it's only row 1 I want to manipulate. And what I want to do is multiply it by 1/2. So Maple automatically assumes that this number indicates the factor I want to multiply the row by. So, and I should assign a name to this new matrix. Let's just call it T2, like that. And there we have the result. Now I provided a 1 here in the upper left corner, and I'm ready to provide a 0 down here now. So this is actually the last case, which involves multiplying this row by 3, or actually -3, and then adding this row to the third row down here. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to provide a 0 here. So adding this row by -3, multiplying it by -3 gives a -3 here, which when added to this row gives a 0 down here. So how do we do that using the row operation command? Row operation, and the matrix I want to manipulate is T2. Now, the list here contains the numbers of the 2 rows I would like to manipulate, and the first number, row 1 here, is the row that's going to be changed. In my case, that's row 3. So I write 3 here. And the second number here in the list is the row that I want to multiply by some number and add to the first row here. And that's row 1 in my case. And the number I want to multiply row 1 by is -3, so I'll write that here. And of course I should assign this new matrix to some name, T3, and let's look at the result. Alright, so what we see here is that we've multiplied this row up here by -3, added it here, so we get a 0. Also -3 times 2, that's -6, added to 4, that gives -2, and so on. So it seems to work. Now the next thing I would like to do, I'll do a few more of these operations and then I'll speed it up and we'll eventually look at the final result. So my next object is to provide a 1 here in the diagonal, and I'll do that by multiplying this row 2 by -1. So my command will be row operation, the matrix is T3, the row is the second row, and I'd like to multiply it by -1, and I'll assign the name T4 to this new matrix, semicolon, and there we have a 1 in the diagonal. And now I'd like to provide a 0 here, so my next matrix is T5, and I'm manipulating T4, and I want to modify row 3 using row 2, and row 2 is supposed to be multiplied by 2. It must be, because when I multiply 1 by 2, equals 2, and when that's added to minus 2, that should equal 0. So let's see how that turns out. That worked out nicely. I have a 0 down here. Now I'll speed up the operations a bit. So I'm dividing row 3 by 2, or multiplying by 1/2. And now I have all zeros over here in the lower triangle here. So now it's time to work my way backwards and provide zeros here and here and here in the upper triangle. So what I'll do is I'll add this third row to the second row. So I'd like to multiply row 3 by 1, that is not modified at all, and then add it to row 2. And the same thing goes for the next operation. I'd like to make this minus 1 a 0. I'll just add my third row to the first row. T7. And I'd like to modify row 1 using row 3 and just multiply row 3 by 1. There you go. And my final operation is to make this 2 here a 0, and that is done by multiplying row 2 by minus 2 and then adding it to row 1. T8 here. I'd like to modify row 1 using row 2, multiplying by minus 2. And now we have the matrix on what we call reduced row echelon form. And there it's very easy to read off the values of my first variable, x1, it might be, is equal to 4, x2 is equal to minus 1, and x3 is equal to 1. So that concludes this video about the row operation command.